So I believe, let's see, the topic of today is to kind of go through a walkthrough of compliance, kind of vision and roadmap. And let me open the QA doc here.
Yeah, it's just I just put in some general questions that I sort of came up with, but I mean, I'm happy to revise, change, or go a completely different direction.
Sure. No, this is great. I like that you prepared this well. Let me just kind of walk through them one at a time, but then just interject questions as you have them. And then maybe async after we get off this call, I'll go and try to plug in issues that are relevant to each theme.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so what is compliance generally and specifically for GitLab? So it's a bit of a loaded question because there's a few facets. We have internal compliance and we have external compliance. And external means like our customers and users using our platform in a compliant or regulated environment. So I'll focus on the latter. So compliance for our customers generally is they're trying to solve that challenge of we as an organization, so I'm a customer, my organization, Org A, has a set of policies. Those policies dictate everything from how strong your password has to be to how they handle your HR data. So in the scope of GitLab, it's primarily like the SDLC and InfoSec, like those technology, infrastructure, intellectual property, security kinds of considerations. And so they have policies that say, we scan every code deployment for vulnerabilities before it goes to production. So translating that to GitLab means, okay, I'm gonna enable security scans and vulnerability scans and dependency scans for every code deployment. And so that's generally what it is. Specifically, there's three elements. As an organization, if I'm getting audited, I have to show the auditor what I say I do. So we do these scans on every code deploy. I have to actually do those things so that I can then, number three, prove that I did them. So the auditor will ask for that evidence. Show me, if you say you scan every code deploy, show me a code deploy from today, from a week ago, from a month ago, from 43 days ago, from 6 minutes and 23 seconds ago. Like they're gonna pick samples. Because in theory, if you have met that criteria and you do that for every step, then yes, you are doing what you say you're doing. So that's, I think, the gist of that answer. Do you have specific questions about that, or is that clear enough for now?
No, that makes sense. So from specifically about auditing, this is very dependent on which compliance, I guess, is called a framework, isn't it? A compliance framework that they're using. In terms of the frameworks, they sign up to them, or they're required. I assume they're required to do them for business reasons, like financial institutions or government-related contracts, whatever. They have to comply with certain regulations to be able to work in their fields of interest. Yes.
Yes. So for clarity, there are a multitude of different frameworks. They generally spawn out of legal or regulatory requirements at kind of the government level. So for example, Sarbanes-Oxley in the US was, I believe their origin there was Enron, but largely to help regulate financial institutions to prevent that kind of thing and instill best accounting practices and principles. Things like the GDPR, of course, spun out of data regulation that was rooted back in, I think, the mid 90s. I think it's EU Directive 42 or 43 or something like that. And but then you have other ones that are not necessarily legal. They're more like industry best practice. So PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, was created by a professional council or entity of sorts that says if you're and I think it's backed by Visa, I want to say. I think Visa founded that council and they've put out this document. And so it's an industry best practice to say we, Visa, and really all card brands will not work with you unless you are PCI DSS compliant. HIPAA was another regulatory one for healthcare information. So yeah, they have industry or legal origins. And then the companies, their policies usually cover multiple frameworks. So if I'm a financial institution, It's going to be Sarbanes-Oxley, most likely going to be PCI. There's probably even some elements of HIPAA, depending on the type of financial institution you are. And so my policies are going to do the best to find that middle ground. So I don't have the same policy, but a slightly different flavor for each framework. It'll be generally they'll find like the common denominator, like what's the most strict thing we can do, or maybe the least strict thing depending on the culture. What's the one thing we can do that satisfies all three requirements sufficiently, which when you look at the frameworks, stuff like PCI is a little less prescriptive than HIPAA, for example. So you write the policies that find that middle ground. And so that's part of the challenge too, is like, how do we build features that are a middle ground when things can get very nuanced?
Okay. And does that mean that GitLab has, I guess, built these frameworks into the product, or a subset of frameworks, or is it more about picking out the requirements of individual frameworks and integrating those in? So like security auditing, or checking that you've got the right kind of license on a project or whatever it may be. So rather than saying we support HIPAA blah, we say we support these features, which then allow you to meet your requirements with your framework.
Right, exactly that latter example, right?
Okay.
But there is some truth and a yes answer to the first part as well, right? So like the second part, you nailed it perfectly. Well articulated, I think you've got that perfect. The first part is we're working on some ideas around, like in the kickoff call, building the project templates that have pre-populated audit issues. What we've teased out from customers is that they have an internal audit or compliance team who's asking for data or evidence or something to help supplement the compliance program. And so if we can create these issues that eventually become automatic as far as data collection, then for the day-to-day user of GitLab, the technical user, yourself, for example, as you write code and you make changes and you do your day-to-day job, we can automatically collect the important data points there to put into those issues. And then an auditor can come in, or maybe you as a team leader, engineering manager, can export that data to then provide to them, but basically removing that overhead there. So there's a little bit of helping them manage it, but mostly right now, especially just supporting their efforts.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess that kind of, so we've already sort of discussed compliance for users. So I guess we could do, it leads on quite well to what GitLab is offering at the minute for compliance. To then, and then further on to that, what are we aiming to do long term, Q1, Q2, whatever, for the remainder of this fiscal year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say right now there's a lot of configuration options in GitLab that I think many customers find the right workflows or mixture of settings that work for them, at least kind of well enough. But I think what we want to do is we want to get to a point where that's less upfront burden, right? So if we can, I'll walk you through one example that kind of answers the second part of like Q1, Q2 kind of thing. So one thing that we're trying to implement, the project topics MVC, where customers can label, what that allows us to do is several-fold. One, we can associate certain projects with those frameworks that we can report on them in the dashboard for general visibility play. Two, we can say, as we implement more features at the admin or group level that restrict certain project behaviors or activity, you can apply it selectively to projects instead of a heavy-handed broad stroke. So you can say, apply this setting to the SOX and PCI project topics, for example. So it gives an element of control there, which we can also report on those relationships. But then the third, and I think one of the most valuable takeaways, is we can then go back to those customers and do very targeted research and say, of the 10 projects you have labeled as SOX, what's the settings that are enabled for that? And then we can derive that common ground to say, okay, these 10 projects share all of these same settings and values. So then we can create project templates that are geared towards SOCs. So now when they create a new project, it's create a project, use the Sarbanes-Oxley template, and that imports the settings. Maybe it also imports the audit issues that we're tackling in a separate MVC. And I have this holistic kind of out-of-the-box project template that just sets you up for success, rather than the current workflow, which is you create a new project, you have to maybe build a custom script or manually go in and the overhead of making sure everything's there. Maybe creating the issues if you decide to go that path, but we just front load all of it for you. So that's kind of the two answers in one there to give you an idea as far as what it's currently like and then where I'd like to go with it. But even still, we have a lot of work to do to add more settings that give admins and group owners the control they need to lock things down, specify certain activities. Like that's a core focus, because right now the common theme is just we don't have enough control of our environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess specifically for the project topics, we're going to have to differentiate compliance topics from more generic ones.
Yeah.
So does that mean that we're going to run for the project topics? Are we going to, is the aim to eventually allow them to define any topic under compliance that they would like? Or are we going to be very specific and say, these are the frameworks that we support, so then we can do the automated work that we want to do?
Yeah, I think it would be the latter. As much as I would love it to be kind of like, tell us what you're working with, I think that if we control that narrative and say, you can only label with these things, then we can make sure that we provide the holistic experience. Because if you add a project topic for, a very specific ISO standard and we're not prepared with any other experience or feature to go with it, then I don't know that there's a lot of value there other than just identifying it, which is valuable. But yeah, I think we would want to control it so we can report on it. And it gives us, I think, better control of the implementation for adjacent features is my assumption there. But yeah.
Does that mean we're going to provide a way for users to ping us a message and say, can you support this framework, X framework? So we can start getting stats to say, I don't know, 200 of our users want this specific ISO thing. Only one of them want this other framework. So we can start to see where the priorities are, where the user demand is for each of these frameworks, and what our users are actually trying to, not just the ones that they're using because we built them, but also the ones that they want to start using too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's absolutely a path we should be on, to collect that data and help prioritize the frameworks we support. And support is kind of general, right? I think in my mind that means that we have this project template with the sensible defaults that are ready to go as far as settings. It comes preloaded, maybe optionally with the issues that map to the actual framework. And maybe there are other workflows or experiences we create that complement or support that specific framework versus just, oh, now you can just create the topic. It'll be interesting because what I imagine we'll hear will be kind of like this, there will be maybe 10 that are kind of commonly applied. And then everything else after that would be, smaller, much smaller volume. That's my assumption. But I would hope that we're also at a point when we're ready to start taking that input, that it's also a pretty streamlined process from our perspective. So even if somebody says, hey, I am literally the only organization following this one framework, that would just be like, all right, cool. We'll just go get all of this done and we can deliver it within one release cycle. Yeah. I think that'd be a really great place to be in.
That'd be a lot of tooling. That'd be a nice place to have that level of, I guess, support with internally to be able to handle that variety of compliance.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So this sort of, my next couple of questions are very compliance dashboard, which is the target, I guess, for Q1 and beyond is to try and get a MVC out whereby our users can see either, I guess, on an admin group project, I don't know which, all three maybe, level, where they are at in terms of meeting their requirements for their compliance framework, plus seeing any issues or problems that may arise as a result.
Mm-hmm.
That is my takeaway from that, and you can tell me otherwise. So I think I'd probably just solve my to answer my own question. What problems are we trying to solve for this tool, haven't I?
Yeah, well, our work here is done.
Is there any specific problems that during our research that users have raised that sort of brought us to this idea of a compliance dashboard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, you did more or less answer, which is great. And I'll supplement it with the biggest problem we've encountered from talking to customers is that GitLab already has a lot of this data that they need to prove or monitor compliance. The problem is that it's not aggregated anywhere in a view that's very relevant or specific to their context. So we have, a security dashboard you can go to view very security specific things. We have an analytics dashboard you can go to view very broad analytics things, but we don't have a compliance dashboard where we can go to view very compliance related things. And so the vision, which is derived from the customer conversations and pain points, is basically we want to build an experience or a dashboard where if I'm the primary stakeholder who is the custodian and manager of this compliance context for my organization in GitLab, I shouldn't have to leave this page. If I have one day or a week or 1 hour a day dedicated to just kind of maintaining or managing my compliance status, I want to go to this dashboard and then answer all of the questions I have. Like, hey, do I have any merge requests that need attention? Do I have any projects that are in violation of policy? Is there memberships that are being granted that shouldn't be? Is there something configured or unconfigured that should or shouldn't be? And the moment that this person has to go outside of the dashboard to answer a question, we should be able to capture that in some way, right? Customer interviews, walkthroughs, that sort of thing, to say, okay, why'd you go over there? Why'd you go to this other view to get that thing? And if that's something we can apply broadly to the compliance persona or use case, then we should do that. So yes, like that's the core problem, is that this compliance specific data is not currently consolidated into one view, and people are having to work too hard to write custom tooling to manually click through groups and projects to find that information.
That makes sense. I'm not sure if there's anything to add, because my follow-up question is what are the most difficult, complicated challenges which have been or are being faced in relation to the compliance dashboard? I guess from that question, I was sort of targeting or thinking about, so we've got the concept of a compliance dashboard and we've got the overarching aim of providing absolutely everything you need to meet your, what you need to do to make sure you are meeting your compliance needs. But as a subset of that, obviously that's a very broad topic with quite a lot of complicated aspects to it. And I was just trying to dig to see, were there any specific ones that came to mind in terms of trying to solve or figure out how are we going to face or solve the challenge that came up?
Yeah, it's another great question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's a very specific challenge in terms of something very concrete. I can speak broadly to two challenges in particular. One is that we have this challenge where, kind of what I alluded to earlier, organizations might be in the same industry with similar operations, but they're going to have different policies. A very oversimplified example is we're the same or different organizations, same profile, but you might require 3 approvers for a merge request. I might only require 2. And so even nuances like that are just difficult to surface in a way that's universally alertable. So trying to navigate that challenge. The second challenge on our end, the technical side, is that because GitLab is such a broad, large, massive application, figuring out how do we bring in all of this data that already exists in a way that's not going to create a bunch of maybe unnecessary work, in a way that's not going to create future technical debt or headaches. And so, yeah, and so those are a lot of the unknowns that we'll just kind of naturally work through, I think.
Or even information that they don't actually need, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's going to be some of that naturally, because some organizations, may need something that might be minor to others and vice versa. But I think we should be able to pretty successfully avoid adding anything that nobody needs.
Mm. So my final question is very specific, I guess, to my situation, but I'd be happily if you wish to broaden it to others or other disciplines. What could front-end engineers be doing to help help compliance further reach its goals? What, not necessarily, I'm not targeting per se saying we're not doing these. More generally, it could be stuff we are doing already, but what should we be doing specifically to try and make sure that compliance, one, we're hitting our OKRs, two, we're making yours and UX designers and backend engineers and whatever it might be, life easier, and three, make sure we are meeting the needs of our users and customers?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question. I think from my perspective, the engineers, both front end and back end, have just been absolutely phenomenal, right? Asking the right questions at the right times, pushing back, challenging, seeking clarification. I think that's all very healthy and productive. I think one thing I would add on to it as kind of a nice to have would be trying to give thought to as this vision forms and we start putting out more design prototypes and validating things, feeling that autonomy and that freedom to suggest, hey, I see where you're going with this, but what about this other thing? And I have this other idea, and wouldn't it be cool if we did this instead? Because I'm very close to the subject matter. So is Daniel, as a product designer. And I think what's really valuable is having you as the technical experts provide that insight and that feedback. Because even an idea that you might feel might be silly or insignificant could manifest as something really important and valuable for our customers. It could trigger a different idea that we all come to some same conclusion on. So I would just encourage even more involvement wherever you feel comfortable doing so for the entire engineering team. And I think that would be really great.
Well, that's easily enough to do. I have lots of stupid ideas.
Same. Same.
I feel like I know a lot more about compliance just by spending these 15 minutes with you already. I feel a lot better about compliance and understanding what we're trying to do and the vision behind it, which is great. Thank you. Secondly, I guess I should just say that I'm should get back to doing some coding and making this happen. Unless, I can't think of any other questions off the top of my head. It was really thorough. Unless there's anything you wanted to raise or say, especially since we're recording this and other people might have, if there's any questions that you think could be better raised here. So it's recorded for all time.
For all time until I remove it. No, I think you did a very thorough job putting together some questions ahead of this call. I really dug the format. I love that we were able to share the thoughts and ideas here. I think it was really productive. I'd like to maybe make it a regular thing, either one-on-one with some of the other engineers that might feel that they don't have the right context, or just looking for the clarifications. And yeah.
I think getting other engineers involved, getting them to ask questions, or even getting engineers to talk to other engineers or UX to the engineers, mixing it up, not just product, would be a really good idea to try and spread knowledge around compliance, make it less of a complicated, scary thing, and something that we can have real impact on our customers and users for.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for setting this up. I need to hop to a customer call now, but it was a pleasure as always. Good to see you.
And you. Ciao.
Take care.